Ik wou eigenlijk beginnen met een vraag aan jullie, of een paar vragen aan jullie.
I'd like to start with a question.
Stel je voor dat je hebt...
Suppose you need a new pair of trousers, blue jeans for example. You go to the shop and you see two diesel jeans. They both have the same cut, the fabric has the same feel and touch, and the same color. Suppose the quality is the same, and one of the two has a green sticker with a statement of diesel that these jeans have been produced greener than the other jeans of diesel. Now, suppose that you believe diesel, and suppose that both pairs of jeans have the same price. What I want to know now is who of you will buy the jeans with the green sticker?
Met de groene sticker. Ik wil graag handen zien.
I want to see hands. Well, I see almost all hands, don't I? But now the second question, and I want you to be honest with yourself. If the jeans with the green sticker are 5% more expensive, who of you will still buy the jeans with the green sticker? I want to see hands again.
Ik wil graag handen zien. Dat zijn er niet zo...
Not so much hands anymore. Who doesn't buy green? So, it's about 50-50. And I have an additional question. What if, when it's 10% more expensive? Hands please again. I see hardly any hands left. Only a few will buy it. I must say that you score even less than other groups of students. But what you see is that the environment is considered to be important. But you are not prepared to pay more for it, and you are not the only ones. 97% of the Dutch people act the same way. That is to say that 80% of the Dutch regard the environment as very important. However, only 2 to 5% are prepared to pay more for green products. I myself among the big group of people who is not willing to pay more. I will explain later in this lecture how that works. But perhaps you have noticed an important underlying question. How do you know that something is better for our environment or not? How can you measure that? Well, there we need life cycle assessment, LCA for short. I know that an overwhelming majority of you hear that word for the first time, but I will explain. What is it? When do you apply it? What's behind it? How do you do it? And issues you should be aware of. I will explain all this because you have to do the LCA lab. Then you have to know how to do it all. There are 2 lectures. In the first hour, I will start with the question why we would make an LCA at all. There are people who tend to say, you should make an LCA because it's important. But many people think, might be, but why should I do all the effort? The second issue in the first hour is on the 2 main steps in LCA. First, making a list of polluting substances, and then creating an indicator for sustainability. The first hour is a bit on the theory, as far as you need to know. The second hour is on the application of the theory in practice, and that appears to be amazingly simple. For that, we will show a case in transport packaging. You see here a corrugated board box and a plastic crate. We will analyze which one is the best choice for the environment. I will tell you as well which issues you should be aware of when you do the LCA lab. At every PowerPoint sheet you see on the top right where we are in the lecture. The first basic question is, what is sustainability? This question triggers a lot of debate in science. One thing everybody agrees on is that sustainability has to do with the so-called triple P. It has to do with our planet, that is to say our nature, for ourselves and the next generation. It has to do with profit as well, but the meaning of this P is wider than profit. I prefer to use the word prosperity, since our society does not like to lose it. And it has to do with people. There are many interpretations of this third P. Which people? My opinion is that we should focus here on the poor people of the third world, the so-called bottom of the pyramid. The current situation here is far from sustainable, since these people don't have a fair share of the global prosperity. The basic idea of the Triple P is that all these three issues must be okay for a sustainable society in the future. The idea is that you should make balanced decisions with regard to these three Ps. You should consider the trade-off between our economy and our ecology, and the trade-off between our own prosperity and the lack of prosperity in the third world. For the master students in industrial design and engineering, there is a lecture on how to deal with the planet and prosperity at the same time, so-called eco-efficient value creation. But today we will talk only about the planet. How do we know that a product or a service is good for the planet in comparison to another product? How do we know that a pair of jeans with a green label is better for the environment compared to the average pair of jeans? The method to resolve such questions is life cycle assessment, LCA for short. This is an analysis of polluting emissions and an analysis of depletion of the resources of our Mother Earth. The Triple P model is quite old.
Dus het opraken van materialen.
The idea is based on an even older United Nations study of the Brundtland Committee. You will find there the definition of sustainability. At the first page of the preface, however, is a remarkable sentence. What we need now is an era with economic growth. Growth that is forceful and at the same time socially and environmentally sustainable. So, the Brundtland Committee is saying here that we need a sort of new, clever economy where we can maintain prosperity with much better care for the environment. A few years later, a group of big multinationals thought about it at the World Business Council of Sustainable Development. They developed a sort of general mission statement. The delivery of competitively priced goods and services that satisfy human needs and bring quality of life. And I stop here since this is what you see in many mission statements of big companies. But they added to that, while progressively reducing ecological impacts and resource intensity throughout the life cycle to a level at least in line with the Earth's estimated carrying capacity. The basic idea is that we overload the Earth with toxic substances because of ever-increasing economic activities. Often these substances already exist in nature, but we simply emit too much of them. So our Mother Earth is not in equilibrium anymore. I come back to my question on the pair of jeans. People are citizen and consumer at the same time. I'm consumer when I come to a shop and buy the best quality to price ratio I can get. At that moment I don't think about environmental issues. Then I optimize my personal benefit and not the environmental benefit. This is the prevailing consumer behavior.
Als ik nu 's avonds in een luie stoel zit, met een wijntje en een krantje.
However, when I sit in my armchair at home in the evening and I have my glass of wine and my newspaper, I think about my 6 lovely grandchildren. Then I think about their future and that we should not ruin their nature. In such a moment I am a different person than I am in the shop. In the shop I am a short-time impulse buyer. At home I realize what we should do in the long term as citizens. I realize that we should ask our governments to make regulations so that it is forbidden for our industry to pollute the world free of charge. As a consumer, I am glad to buy all kinds of products, but as a citizen, I want the pollution to be stopped. So I want the government to do something about it, so that I know that the products I buy are relatively clean. This is a slow process where, via politics, governments introduce regulations step by step. Companies accept that as far as these regulations create a level playing field in terms of competition. Regulations are of extreme importance in society. When you take away the rules in urban traffic, it'll be chaos. That applies as well to the current free consumer markets with regards to the environment. The issue is the environmental burden that is caused by a product. This burden costs money to our society. In our model, a product has 3 dimensions: the price you pay in the shop, the costs to make the product, and the damage to the environment, the so-called external costs. We call these external costs eco costs. It is a trend in society that heavy pollution of industry is not accepted anymore by the inhabitants of a country. This results in stricter regulations by countries. Prevention, so the eco costs, will then become a part of the internal production costs. And as you see in this picture, the total cost might become higher than the price the consumers are prepared to pay. At that moment, the company goes bankrupt. So here's the relevance of eco costs. As a company, I should reduce that, otherwise I will become too expensive and will be squeezed out of the market. The governmental regulations can be that the governments will force the industry to apply the best available technology. That will cost money. Or the governments start to apply eco-tax or a tradable emission rights system, which is a sort of clever tax system that will add to the production costs. So external costs become internal costs sooner or later. For further analysis, I can place my products in a so-called product portfolio matrix. Such a product portfolio matrix has 4 quadrants. Companies use such a matrix to determine their strategy. What we do here is that we have 2 product characteristics, so-called attributes, one at the y-axis and one at the x-axis. At the x-axis, we display the quality to cost ratio. This ratio can be either high or low. At the y-axis, we have the eco burden, either high or low eco costs. The importance of a high quality to cost ratio is clear to you. When my products have a high quality, people want to buy it, and when the production costs are low at the same time, I can make a lot of profit. Since companies try to make profit as much as possible, most of the modern products are in the right upper corner, since they are not good for the environment. They have short-time success, but are long-term not sustainable. What we should try is to reduce the eco costs. Why should you reduce your eco costs? Since eco costs will become internal costs in the long term, and you will make less profit. You will shift to the quadrant in the left upper corner. There you have hardly any profit and pollute the world, so you should quit with such a product before you go bankrupt. These processes are normally quite slow, but they might evolve amazingly quick. Take for instance Hummer. Hummer made a lot of profit but became suddenly unacceptable from an environmental point of view and is pushed out of the market. Volkswagen Diesel had the same fate. You cannot buy it anymore in the USA, and the periods of domination of diesel cars are over in Europe as well. I myself have worked my whole life in business. I'm a pensioner now, but I like science rather than go fishing. I was an executive board member of a big multinational in paper and packaging. We made, among other products, corrugated board boxes and plastic crates. The presidents of the 2 divisions came to us at the executive board and asked the company to invest in their divisions, since they both made a lot of profit. Big companies, however, can often only focus and invest in one business sector at the same time, so we had to make a choice between the corrugated board boxes or the plastic crates. When you think about such a choice, then it's obvious that you choose for the product which can make profit in the future as well. And that is the product where you expect the least risk in terms of environmental burden. So we were interested at that time in which packaging solution we would have the least eco costs. In other words, we were interested at that time in the results of a life cycle assessment. Now a question to you all. Do you, intuitively, think that the corrugated box is the best solution for the transport of fruit and vegetables, since such a box is made of recycled paper instead of polluting plastics? Or do you think that the plastic crate is better for fruit and vegetables, since it is durable and can last about 30 round trips instead of one?
30 roundtrips. Dus ik denk toch dat die plastic krat eigenlijk veel beter is. Mag ik even...
May I see hands? Who of you think that the corrugated board box is the best solution? Okay. And who of you think that the plastic crate is the best solution? Okay. You are the majority. You think that the solution of long-lasting crates wins LCA, since durability in LCA is more important than recyclability. In the second hour, we will analyze which solution is the best. But before we do that, we have to look on how we have to make an LCA and what it is. In LCA, you look at the total chain, from mining of materials and production of energy, to production, to the use phase with maintenance, and ending at the processes of the end-of-life stage with landfill or recycling. You need transport throughout the total chain, and during all these activities you will have emissions to the air, to water and to the soil. And again, we are interested in the best choice, so we have to make calculations to enable a comparison. We do these calculations step by step. The first step is define our system and make a list of all of the emissions. The second step is analyze these emissions by a so-called single indicator, if possible. Let's see how that works in practice. But I will make this system a bit more abstract. We will regard it now as a process with sub-processes in it, all inside a black box. These processes and sub-processes might be circular. The input of that black box is materials, energy and transport. The output of the black box is the primary product or service, with sometimes a byproduct, and waste materials to landfill or recycling. Sometimes waste can be burned with heat recovery. And of course we have the inevitable toxic emissions. This is the basic model.
op een afvalhoop terechtkomt. Dus dat is mijn denkmodel. En wat gaan we nu doen?
What will we do now with this model? We will have a look at it by means of an example. It is about sheep in a trailer that go to the slaughterhouse. At the moment the truck leaves the gate of the farm. And now we will look at all the emissions related to this sheep, so all the emissions to breed the sheep. For more than a decade, a Swiss group called Eco is assembling data on emissions by processes, so-called life cycle inventory lists. In Germany, there is another big group called ThinkStep, who also does this kind of work. But at our university in Delft, we use either Eco data or our own database called IDMET app based on work from other universities. On this slide we see a list of Eco The breeding of these sheep generate about 500 emissions to the air, as we call it, from cradle to gate. It might be that you think, how on earth do they arrive at such a list? Well, the assembly of such a list is done by means of a computer system in a clever way. That is done as follows. Here you have the sheep. To breed the sheep, you need products and its subproducts. You need soybeans plus maize for food. You need fertilizer for the land. You need a shed for the sheep. And you need a lot of transport. And each product has its subproducts and sub-processes. Let's look at the shed. What kind of products do you need for a shed? it's not on this picture, but to build a shed you need concrete for the floor, steel beams for the structure, cladding for the walls, and a roof. And of course, transport. For transport we need diesel oil and a truck. For a truck we need steel, etc. You can imagine now that you can build a lot of cradle-to-gate processes with much less basic building blocks. With 500 to 1000 basic sub-processes, you can easily build a tenfold of lifecycle inventory lists of other products assembled from these basic inventory lists. You need a computer for that. And you need to assemble what hundreds of scientists all over the world did before on LCA. At our university, we have SimmerPro software to make lifecycle inventory lists. What you can do now is compose your own meal. We have the meat from the previous PowerPoint slides. Then we add the activity of the slaughterhouse and the retailer, and we're in our kitchen. The same applies for the vegetables and the wine. We have to cook it all, and there we are, our meal. The computer software adds up to all the emissions from the past, applying all sub-processes you need. In that way, you get one big list. You can imagine that you end up with 1,000 to 2,000 lines in practice. At our university, we are interested in manufacturing of products. I have an example of a Senseo coffee machine. The basic approach is the same. The coffee machine is an assembly of a number of subunits. You can disassemble these subunits and weigh the materials in it. In SimmerPro you have all available databases and you can find specific data for metal and plastics. We end up with a long list of emissions. To do something with that makes sense is our second problem. We want to compare design alternatives, so we need a so-called single indicator. We don't want a long list. We want to have one indicator for the pair of jeans to base our decision on. And you can imagine there is more than one way to create such a single indicator. The first indicator we deal with is the carbon footprint. It is in a way the easiest route to a single indicator. You simply throw away the whole list except from carbon dioxide. It's easy to understand what you do. You have a so-called single issue score on the important issue of global warming. The second possibility is to try to calculate the external damage of each emission and add it up to determine the total damage. Such an indicator is the Eco Indicator 99, providing the damage information in millipoints. You can find that a lot in old literature. It is obsolete now and has been replaced by the recipe indicator system. Another solution is that you do not look at the damage, but that you look at the costs to prevent that damage. You reduce then the emissions to a no effect level that brings nature of our Mother Earth in equilibrium again. Such a system is called prevention-based. The Eco Cost system is such a prevention-based model. We apply that at our university. I will give the advantages and the disadvantages of each system. The advantage of the carbon footprint is that the basic idea is simple to understand. The disadvantage, however, is that you do not look at toxic substances. And toxicity is an important issue, isn't it? Heavy metals, fine dust, carcinogens? You don't look at that. That leads to what I call Volkswagen engineering. They did a good job on carbon dioxide, but forgot the toxicity of NOx. And you do not look at the depletion of our resources. And when resource depletion is not part of your calculation system, you cannot assess whether a system scores well in the cradle-to-cradle philosophy. By the way, who of you have heard from cradle-to-cradle? Hands please? I see. A lot of you have heard of it, so there's no need for further explanation. But the issue is that cradle-to-cradle calculations don't work well when materials are not a part of it. The second calculation system is damage-based, such as Eco Indicator 99 and Recipe 2016. The basic idea of the Eco Indicator is that you have two calculation steps. First, you combine the emissions in groups. For instance, all substances with a greenhouse effect go into the group that cause climate change, such as carbon dioxide and methane. Other substances go into groups that affect the ozone layer, carcinogens, ecotoxicity, etc. Within each group, you know the relative damage of each substance. The calculations within these so-called midpoint groups are based on physical, chemical, or medical evidence. For instance, methane is about 25 times as harmful as carbon dioxide. So 1 kilogram of methane is equivalent to 25 kilograms of carbon dioxide. In short, 1 kilogram of methane equals 25 kilogram equivalent carbon dioxide. But we still have to go to a single indicator. We will add up the midpoint groups to 3 so-called endpoint groups. 1 for human health, 1 for ecosystems, and 1 for resources. So we have to add up the damage of the depletion of the ozone layer, carcinogens, and respiratory diseases to end up with the endpoint for human health. The same principle applies to the endpoints of ecosystems and resources. These calculations are very sophisticated, very complex, and are based on many assumptions. The result is that endpoint calculations are rather inaccurate compared to the midpoint calculations. And still the last issue has to be resolved. How important are human beings compared to our nature? Of course, this last weighing step is subjective. But most LCA practitioners apply 0.4 as a multiplier for human health and ecosystems and 0.2 for resources. Then you'll end up with your single score. Quite arbitrary, but there's no other possibility. This slide gives you an impression of the damage calculation. We start with the emissions to nature. That will end up in our food. When we eat it, we might get ill. In serious cases, you'll end up in a hospital. Such an illness is weighed in terms of a DALY, a disability-adjusted life year. When people die and lose, for instance, 10 life years, the DALY is 10. There are tables for the DALY of the World Health Organization for people who have a non-mortal illness. I can imagine that such kind of calculations are strange to you. But when you look at the details, this DALY system seems as such quite objective. But the way from emissions to illness is the problem. My next PowerPoint slide depicts a calculation of Recipe 2016. This system is much better, but the endpoints suffer from the same problem that there are some complex issues to be resolved, leading to inaccuracies. And the last step of weighing the 3 endpoints is formally forbidden in the LCA specification in ISO 14044. A completely other approach is that of the Eco Cost system. We look then at emissions on a regional, continental or worldwide scale. These emissions have to be reduced to a level that is sustainable. For carbon dioxide, that is 70 to 80% of the current level. In general, it's much easier to calculate these no-effect levels than the damage of current emissions. The eco costs are the marginal prevention costs which are required. The way you calculate it is depicted in the figure of this slide. On the y-axis, the prevention costs. On the x-axis, the percentage of prevention starting at the current emissions. We have more than one prevention measure, and we assume that the cheapest prevention measures are taken first. A certain point at the x-axis is the target, the so-called no-effect level. The prevention measure at the target is the most expensive measure we need. The prevention costs of that last measure in euro per kilogram are the eco costs. But how about damage versus prevention costs? In the upper block, you see the prevention costs calculated in 2007. In the lower block, you see some marginal damage costs as far as they can be calculated for cure in hospitals. It is a coincidence that the marginal prevention costs for acidification, fine dust and summer smog are in the same range as the marginal damage costs. When you take the accuracy of the calculations into account, the marginal damage and prevention costs are the same. And when you think about that, it is a no-brainer that you should take the prevention measures. For the same price, we can pay for the prevention measures and avoid the damage. This is the calculation structure of the eco costs. It's based on the same kind of midpoint groups for emissions plus groups for resource depletion. And we have a system for socio-economic prevention costs for the appalling labor conditions in the poor world, which can be applied, for instance, to garments made in India and Bangladesh. This is a midpoint table for greenhouse gases. Because of physical differences, each of these gases have an equivalence factor. Methane in this list has a factor 23, since methane is 23 times stronger as carbon dioxide in terms of the greenhouse effect. The eco cost 2007 of carbon dioxide is 13.5 eurocent. Via this equivalent table, we know now all the eco costs of all other substances in the list. And I have a remark here. In 2017, we made a new calculation of the eco cost of midpoints. Most eco costs increased slightly, but the eco cost 2017 of carbon dioxide is a bit lower now since the efficiencies of windmills and PV cells have increased over the last 10 years. The new eco cost of carbon dioxide is estimated now at 11.6 eurocent per kilogram. When all midpoint tables are available and corresponding the eco costs are calculated, the single indicator system can be imported in the CIMAPRO software to calculate the eco costs of a product. The way it works in CIMAPRO is according to the formal calculation system. Step 1. Calculate the life cycle inventory list of the product. And step 2. Calculate the single score in the system for life cycle impact assessment. In the first step, the inventory list is calculated combined with eco-invent, or IDMAT data of the materials and processes which are required to make the product. In the second step, the inventory list is linked to the midpoint list with the corresponding eco costs. In such a way, we can calculate the eco costs of, for instance, polyurethane foam, as you see on this slide. The eco costs of this example are 1.14 euros. So, at our university we make Excel sheets with CIMAPRO output, cradle to gate for materials, energy, transport and manufacturing processes, and for end of life. We do that for eco costs, but for other indicator systems as well, like recipe, carbon footprint and cumulative energy demand. So we have damage-based indicators, a prevention-based indicator, as well as 2 single-issue indicators. Many universities in the rest of the world use these Excel sheets for education, since the Excel tables provide a clear overview for sustainable material selection in design and engineering. Students at our university are free to decide in which system they make their calculations. Since they like to benchmark their designs, they prefer single indicators rather than long lists with midpoint scores. Most of the students take eco costs, since they like the technical business approach of it. I think that when you design a product for the company where you work at in the future, you should tell your boss about the business risks related with high eco costs, as I explained in the beginning of this lecture. He should be made aware of the issue of sustainability in design. I'm happy with the fact that some students make their calculations in more than one single indicator system, since they like to know whether or not their decisions are influenced by the choice of an indicator. In most cradle-to-gate situations, the decisions seem to be rather independent of the indicator. In fact, It does not matter which indicator you take, since all of them will guide you in the direction of using less non-sustainable energy and more sustainable materials. When systems have toxic emissions, however, you should use either recipe or eco costs. In cradle-to-cradle comparisons, the carbon footprint and the cumulative energy demand do not perform well, since they do take resource depletion into account, as explained before. We will take a break now. After the break, we will look at the case of the plastic crates and the solid board boxes, and we will look at other practical issues in LCA. You are asked to prepare your smartphone for computer voting after the break.